So we already know that Mew is the most worthless Pokemon assist ever, doing literally nothing when it spawns in. Yes, even more so than Goldeen, since at least Goldeen was always supposed to be worthless. But did you know there's another one that can be rendered technically useless as well? Kinda, at least. This comes from a funny prompt by Final Mix on my Discord, link in the description if you want to join to submit your own facts. But basically, there's apparently just a gap between Zoroark's final hit and when it actually happens. You can see it's right around here or so. Now, a single frame gap isn't very big, and most characters can't really do anything about it, but there's definitely some who do have a frame 1 intangibility move that can be used, which just completely dodges the final hit. And with buffering, the timing is actually really lenient. All you really need to do is just spam the move. Some are technically better than others, given that, say, Dolphin Slash puts you into freefall, but it's still a really funny idea. For characters like Yoshi who have armor on their double jump, you can't really escape the move, but you can drastically decrease its knockback from said armor, which is at least better than nothing. Though for some reason this doesn't work for Ryu and Ken's focus attack. There's a clear reduction in damage taken from the last hit, but I guess it either counts as a multi-hit or just gets ignored. I was curious on a few things though. For example, is this actually 1 frame or can 2 frame moves work? The best way to test this that I thought of was Mii Brawler's Feint Jump, which is intangible frame 2 instead of 1. But this did not work, so this is definitely a frame 1 thing. Originally I was going to do tests with air dodges, given how some characters have frame 2 air dodges and Bayonetta's is frame 1 with the Bats Within mechanic. However, apparently Bats Within just doesn't register with this attack. I can't imagine why, but it just never worked, so I guess that's the thing. And of course I needed to see if this worked for the final smashes that are extremely similar to this vibe, but with either Greninja or Mii Brawlers, there didn't seem to be this gap between the final hit, so I guess that's just a little nerf to Zoroark. But again, be careful doing this, as for some characters you may be better off taking the final hit rather than dodging it. Speaking of survival, I think it's about time we hop into today's main course. At first it came from Ruben on Twitter talking about the finished zoom, and initially I thought it required mods, until Examine623, who I'll now be referring to as Alex the Weeb, brought it up in my Discord again and indirectly showed me that I'm just kinda stupid. Here's the concept. Take a look at Steve's percent here, and yeah, I guess he's just not allowed to take knockback anymore. Cool. For those of you familiar with the PMLG tech, I'm not going to explain all that because that's not what this is. This involves no crazy weird setups or inputs or anything. All this is me inputting minecart with slightly decent but still lenient timing while this finished zoom is happening. You've probably already noticed this by now, but the big factor here is the game speed. I'm currently in custom smash with the game speed set to slow, or 1/2. For whatever reason, when you change the speed like this, the way the finished zoom works just gets totally messed up and allows for you to cancel hit stun, or rather act out of hit stun. See, this isn't necessarily a Steve specific tech, minecart is just one of the more practical examples to show off, but any move that will completely halt your momentum will have the same result. My lovely people in Discord, primarily the Requiem Dragon, did some tests throughout the cast to get some other examples, some of which you're seeing right now. And yes, this does mean for certain stronger moves, you can technically punish KOing moves on hit, which is just insanely ridiculous and funny to me. For other moves and characters, you'll be able to see them fly across the screen while using their move, and for moves that do nothing to your momentum, this ends up being mostly useless. Though, even if a move doesn't completely reset momentum, if it changes it or has you move at all, it can still let you live longer than you would otherwise. Now, the obvious reason why we can't do this somewhere like training mode is because there's no finished zoom there, which is 100% required. You can see why I thought mods were necessary at first until I was reminded of the existence of custom smash and changing speeds. And yes, changing speeds in general, not specifically slowing it down, as if we do this in the super fast game mode, we can still get the same thing to happen. It's a bit trickier given just how insanely fast it actually is in practice, but buffering is still easy enough and it works. So the main takeaway is that if your character has a move that completely resets momentum, and you are playing in a custom match that changes the speed, oh congrats, you won. Just inherently. Granted, there are ways to counter this actually. For one, if you can get a KO without triggering the finished zoom, that just sorta does it. I think the knockback threshold is kinda tight for that, but it sometimes works. Or you can just edge guard or get another cheesy play. Or even use a move like PK Freeze where they wouldn't be able to act out of it anyways. That's actually pretty cool. But the biggest counter that I found was multi-hits. See, I was gonna try and make a funny clip where I had the Sephiroths infinitely KO and survive against each other, but I could never get the momentum to reset after using up B. And while the timing window isn't necessarily free, it's also not that hard. This isn't a launch speed thing either, as I can do it just fine at 300% when eating an entire forward smash. I used Ness to help out, and while I could easily survive the back air hit, I could not get it to happen from the forward air. So I guess that's just something to look out for. And no, like a lot of these game speed glitches we've gone over on the channel, you can't seem to replicate this with the timer item, regardless of which of the two characters is slowed down. But that's not all for the finish zoom. As it turns out, this mechanic has a lot of niche jank that not very many people know about. Ruben returns with another very interesting fact about the mechanic with electric moves. The best characters to test this out are Samus and Dark Samus. You see, their forward smashes are completely identical in every single facet except for damage type, where Samus's is fire, but Dark Samus's is electric. Here's a quick rundown of their power. In this exact location as Mario at 100% and with the freshness bonus on Samus and Dark Samus, an uncharged forward smash will KO Mario even if he has proper DI to the left. At least that's the DI that I went with for all these tests. However, if I buffer a jump, that's enough for Mario to regain control and lower his momentum to just barely survive. That is to say, this is a pretty extreme margin for survival. However, if we go into a real match, where again all of the data should be the same, but I do it at a time where the finish zoom happens, well, the same is still the case for Samus, you can barely survive with a buffered jump. However, with Dark Samus, you don't survive. Ever. Somehow you're just getting launched a little bit farther and you're done. So what's going on here? Well, as Ruben described, during the finish zoom, there's normally a handful of frames that go by where the character is frozen before they get launched. I saw the launch happen on the 4th frame, Ruben says it's the 5th, I'm not sure either way, but there's clearly a freeze period. However, for electric or paralyzed based damage sources, there is no freeze. You just get launched frame 1. It's a lot more noticeable when you put the two side by side. So essentially, compared to other damage types, with electric or paralyze, you're getting a little bit more knockback out of the attack before the opponent is able to act out of it. The hit stun, or rather the amount of time it takes for you to be able to act out of the hit, is almost identical. The Dark Samus one was actually consistently able to act a single frame earlier, but it wasn't enough to offset the overall knockback distance. It's even easier to visualize in a test that doesn't result in a KO. I started the Marios out in, I'd say, as close to identical positions on the stage as I could get, yet comparing their locations off stage when they first input a jump, the Mario hit by Dark Samus is slightly but noticeably closer to the blast zone than the one from Samus. So yeah, attacks with these sorts of effects technically get a slight buff when it's a finished zoom hit compared to a normal one. But there's actually still more jank to talk about, as mentioned by B on Twitter regarding a certain topic that came up a while ago. Here's the setting. In the tournament Riptide 2024, linked to the match below, it's Zomba vs Riddles. It's pretty intense, last stock, high percent, all that. Zomba gets an up throw on Terry while he's at 171% and Rob has 121% of rage, and the up throw is perfectly fresh. The finish zoom happens and Zomba, assuming that's the round, has a little pop off, but uh-oh, he survived, crazy. Let's take this to training mode real quick. With perfect DI, that being away and very slightly down, you cannot survive an up throw in this setting at 171%. Even a whole 5% lower gets you KO'd. And remember, I have staleness turned on so that I can get the freshness bonus. So you can see how this would all be confusing. But no, this isn't because the game's knockback settings were lower than they should be. Getting this exact same setup in a real match, but with everyone on their last stock, yeah, Terry just survives now. So what's the difference between the training mode test and, okay, I actually don't even need to ask you already noticed the finish zoom, I've been talking about it for basically the whole video. But how does the finish zoom allow Terry to survive effectively 5% or more longer than he should? I'm not entirely sure, honestly, but we can try and analyze the two cases. When we look at the training mode launch, we can see that Terry gets officially KO'd before he's truly touched the very top line of the minimap, aka the top blast zone. Whereas with the finish zoom, you can see that Terry gets super close to the line, basically making out with it, yet it still never registers as a KO. This isn't a completely new thing for the game, we see this a lot with certain spike moves that KO way above the bottom blast zone. So what's exactly the change? Well, I think the best answer is probably knockback speed. And it may have to do with the whole freeze frame thing we talked about before. Again, you can notice that after the zoom in, Terry has a few frames where he starts getting launched, but not too terribly far, compared to in real time, where the one frame he gets launched sends him really far. This is just conjecture, but it's possible that those in-between frames tick down the duration of his knockback, and thus its overall distance and or speed, which might make the game not register him as a KO speed for the top blast zone, and also just additionally gives him more time to DI, and thus also increases his chance of survivability a lot. Granted, I tried to attempt to isolate the factor of DI by just not DIing, but as it turns out, it's kinda hard to trigger the finish zoom and still survive if you don't DI, so I can't really test anything there. For an additional note, the slowdown effect of knockback from the finish zoom is unique to it, so you can't replicate its effects with a timer or a slowed down game mode or anything like that. Long story short, not only does the finish zoom make electric moves better, but it also just makes all moves technically worse, kinda? The mechanic has a lot more effects towards gameplay than you might originally think, which is just really funny. Alright, that was all fun, but let's move on to some miscellaneous nonsense. First, Final Mix comes back to bring up a funny little fact about training mode. Normally, after dealing enough damage or knockback or what have you, you'll hear the crowd in the background clap and just go absolutely bananas. But then I just reset training mode and... yeah, they're gone. Forever. Nothing fixed it until you leave training mode entirely. So there's one of two things happening here. Either the live studio audience hates resets and just gets really angry and sullen and just shuts up forever as a form of protest, or the act of resetting just kills everyone. It's kind of crazy that they'd put that in the kids game, but Gandorf coughed blood one time, so I guess it's fine. Next, again by Final Mix, is a neat trick regarding certain assist trophies. The only real practical example is with Ashley, but you know how when you spawn her in, she's just sorta there? She makes a fairly consistent obstacle wherever she is, but that also means it's not too hard to avoid. Well, you can actually move her model, and thus her cloud effect, if you just keep placing a new crafting table behind her. They're on the same background layer, I guess, so the crafting table shoves her to the side. And you can use this to maybe position her in a more ideal spot after she's already been spawned. Insanely funny tech. But it's also very limited, because the vast majority of assists or Pokemon either move already, can't be interacted with at all, or are on the stage and thus can be moved normally. This is still a technique that I'll lump in here though. Some Pokemon generally do get improved by giving them a little shove, which I still think is just really funny. And fun fact, you actually can shove Metagross. Just barely. Actually, how much does it even weigh? Oh, it's just 1,212 pounds, or about 550 kilograms, or about 86.5 stone. Yeah, that's a measurement apparently. 1 stone is 14 pounds. Bet you didn't know that one. Whatever, so this doesn't actually work on the Pokemon trainer Guy or Gal or whoever. They're on a layer even farther back than Ashley or the crafting table, so they're unaffected. However, with all this talk about layers and stuff, you might be wondering about 2D stages. Already here, if you've never noticed before, the crafting table is on the same layer as everyone else. Steve is still portrayed over it, but you'll notice that when he's here, the crafting table's, I guess, shadow actually covers him. So if there's no layer shenanigans, then as it turns out, Ashley can be shoved just normally now without the need for the crafting table technique. This makes it technically a slight buff for the user, as now anyone can change your positioning whenever. Alright, that was all fun, so let's end off this video with some Game & Watch stuff. First is a submission from SNG77 regarding his model. In the past, we went over how when Game & Watch has an effect that covers him, like metal, under certain animations you can actually see that his model always has a mouth, even when he's facing forward in other directions, despite the fact that you never see it otherwise, which is hysterical on its own. However, when we pair this fact with other equipment, like the Super Leaf, it gets a bit weird. When you see this amazing frame, you'd probably think that he's facing forward, and the back of his head is, you know, behind him. However, when the Super Leaf is on, we can see that his ears are directly on his face. Like, I mean, they're not even attached, you know, 2D appearance and whatnot, but this is clearly the wrong side. It's most noticeable with this animation, where they're planted right here at... oh my... oh my god. That's... okay, that's... I don't want to get demonetized, so I'm just going to move it up here. Yeah, the ears and tail are oriented onto Game & Watch on the wrong side. If we throw the heavy object up while facing left, we can see that the ear and tail are now properly oriented, but the mouth is now on the other side. which means it's not proper. And this is not a per animation thing. The ears and tail are generally aligned to his model, just on the wrong side. Obviously this doesn't really matter when we can't usually see his face, so it's just super cursed knowing that it's all actually backwards. And lastly for today, Mr. Metal had a tweet about a bug from a while back that I just kind of wanted to share. Basically, if Game & Watch was frozen by shadow while he was using an animation that changed his appearance, it would cause his model to go back to normal, but still have it be outstretched from where it was at beforehand, which resulted in a lot of really weird appearances. As you can imagine, based on my lack of pomp and circumstance regarding this, yeah, it's since been patched out unfortunately, but I still felt like it'd be fun to point out that this was a thing at some point and looks really goofy. And now I'm going to end the video forever. But not before talking about some random stuff in this outro, because that's just what I do, I guess. So obviously a lot of big things have happened in the world, like in general, but this is a gaming channel, so let's talk about what's essentially the biggest Nintendo news. It was recently announced that the Switch's successor will have full total backwards compatibility with the current Switch library and its online features. This is basically what I anticipated, at least for the online aspect, but it's really cool to know this for sure. The current model Nintendo's doing is drip feedy, but it's also pretty clearly leaning towards creating something really big over time. And having a hard reset after every single console kind of makes that not happen, right? So what does this mean for Smash? I mean, if you can just play Ultimate the same on the new console, then does that really warrant a new game with as much haste as some people speculate? I'm not sure, but in retrospect, I do have to wonder how much it ruins the chances of a Smash Ultimate Deluxe. Like, think about it. If the same console can play Smash Ultimate totally fine as it is now, why bother even having a deluxe version anyways? If they make a Smash, it'd have to be more unique than that. So at this point, outside of potentially some minor updates here or there, which I guess could happen, I kinda don't know what to expect from the future of Smash at all. Maybe the virtual console will start getting filled out with past Smash games. That'd be really cool actually. But yeah, as always, just let me know what kind of non-Smash content you'd be curious to see from me. Given how much work goes into these videos, it's hard to justify making content on certain games if no one actually really cares here. But if there's enough enthusiasm for it, I might as well, given that we're entering a potentially very busy and exciting era for Nintendo. So with that, I'll end the video there, and also thank my lovely patrons Raighne, Soul700, Burbo, and everyone else for their massive support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.